Hello, everyone. Welcome to the last session of the Silicon Valley Startup Forum at the KAIST. My name is Dojun Lee, and I am a professor at the KAIST College of Business. It is a great pleasure and honor to be the moderator for today's session. The Silicon Valley Startup Forum, hosted by the KAIST College of the Business, invite world-class scholars and experts from the startup community to gain more insight regarding the founding and the growth of the innovation startups. The forum has a total of 10 sessions, and today we are excited to host our last sessions. Today's speakers are Klaus, Wehage, and Aaron Mcdaniel, the CEO and the speaker of the Global Accelerator 10X Innovation Lab. As a representative global accelerator, 10X provides innovating programs to government and the global corporations. They have experience mentoring and coaching about 2,500 startups and attracted $370 million of the investment for incubating companies. Today, we invite them to listen to a lecture on the global business and their specialty, and the topic of the lecture is growth. So far, without further, I please join in the welcoming today's speaker, Klaus and Aaron. Hey, Klaus and Aaron, how are you?
Great. Thanks for having us back.
Okay. So can you explain about you guys?
Absolutely. We're honored to be back. If for those who haven't had a chance to see our previous session from last week, we were talking a bit about this new concept that has come from our research around global business, what we call the global class, or sort of this next generation of companies, and how they think and act and operate differently as they're building out global scale. And so while last week, just as a reminder, we talked a bit about the mindset that these companies have, what they do in order to be successful, how they go about building global scale, and who they build their teams around. Now we're going to talk about a more practical example. And in a few minutes, we're excited to welcome a great partner of ours, Troy Malone. And Troy has an amazing background as it relates to international business expansion and building companies in new areas. And so he's worked for a number of companies, and he's going to be able to share some really interesting insights. And so he'll start by presenting a little bit about his background. I'll read a bio first before he joins. But then after that, we'll do a fireside chat. And so we'll have a chance where I'll start asking questions. And then after a little bit of time, we'll open things up so that you can ask different questions. And so we look forward to be able to answer some of those questions with Troy. And in particular, one of the main things that we're going to focus on in hearing from Troy is his experience leading one of the fast-growing, well-known companies across the world, Evernote, and now how he's continued to apply those principles to new businesses. So, but before that, there are just so many different companies that in the research Klaus and I had done around global class and this next generation of businesses who have had this special mindset that we're wanting to make sure that you are learning, and through hearing from Troy, showing how it's practically applied. And so we thought it would be interesting maybe to share a couple thoughts about another company that's somewhat similar and related to the company that Klaus is working with now, or excuse me, the company that Troy is working with now, called And that's a company that I think we've all heard of, called Zoom. I mean, we're on Zoom right now. And Troy will tell you a little bit more about it, but is a set of features and functionality that go on top of video platforms like Zoom. But Zoom is also a great example of a global class company themselves. In talking to Abe Smith, their head of international, we heard many different stories about how they had to deal not only with expanding and localizing in different markets, but also extreme growth. Growth that few companies of their size have really ever experienced. You know, some companies very early on, they'll deal with, 20, 30% growth. but that's when they have like 5 customers and they're going to 100 customers, not when they have millions of customers and they're going to tens of millions of customers. And so we heard from Zoom that from January 2020 to April 2020, just in that 3-4 month period, they increased their number of users by 25x, and the number of meeting minutes, the run rate for the number of meeting minutes they were going to have per year, by 30x, all because of the pandemic. But because they were a global class company and they had entrepreneurs, if you remember that concept we talked about, globally minded business leaders like Abe, who understood international business expansion, they were very successful in being able to not only handle this extra growth, but also to be able to localize for different markets. And so, as an example, one of the things that was very important for Zoom is they would localize their technology depending on what market that they were in. So a small example of that is in Asia, there's a little bit more formality to meetings than there is in the US, where Zoom is from. And so, as an example, what they did was they were able to integrate different elements that are important within Asian business culture within the structure of meetings. So one of them, as an example, the exchanging of business cards is very, very important. More important in Asian business culture than in US and Western business culture. So Zoom found a way to create functionality to do that digitally, to allow for that exchange, that cultural exchange to happen, but to still do so even though people weren't physically handing each other business cards. Another great example is how, while there are other video platforms that don't give you the functionality to move around people's windows and screens, Zoom allows you to. Because in a lot of Asian business cultures, the way that people are seated in a physical conference room is very, very important. And the main, the head people tend to be in a certain more centralized role in the seats with their lieutenants or subordinates next to them. And so Zoom allows for that functionality to allow you to move windows around within a screen to be able to allow for that cultural consideration. So that's one of a number of different examples, but Zoom is a good example, and thought we would share a little bit about Zoom in part just because because it's a company that is doing video conferencing, which is somewhat similar, and it is a partner of Troy's company that he's working on. So what we'll do is, as we're going to have Troy come in a moment, let me just read a little bit about his background and help you understand a little bit more about who he is. So Troy Malone is the vice president of global production for a company called All Turtles. And so All Turtles is basically a design studio where they incubate a lot of different types of companies. So he oversees global operations at this startup studio that was founded by Phil Libin, who is the founder of Evernote. So he and Troy are working together again on this venture like they had with Evernote. And most recently, he served as vice president international at Weebly, which is a web building platform, a website building platform, and where he oversaw an aggressive expansion into Europe and Latin America. But before Weebly, he was the general manager of Asia Pacific for Evernote, and he was responsible for growing the user base in 9 different countries and organizing the company infrastructure throughout Southeast Asia, in South Korea, and in India. And then before Evernote, he also served as CEO of Pelotonics, which is an online project management solution for businesses. So prior to Pelotonics, he also was an investor in Blue Sky Broadcast, an online educational learning company. And even before that, he was VP of operations at Delmar Database, a back-end database company for mortgage lending and loan processing. He's also the founder of Titan Investment Partners, which is a venture capital fund focused on internet technologies. And he has an undergraduate degree in Korean and an MBA, both from BYU, Brigham Young University. And basically, he has a ton of experience in terms of heading up teams, and in particular tech teams, and scaling them internationally. And so he's an entrepreneur and an entrepreneur. and has a lot of great experience. And as you could tell from a couple things I said there, Korea is near and dear to his heart. I won't necessarily take away the opportunity for him to tell a little bit of his story as to why, but I'm imagining he'll throw in a couple Korean words here and there as he introduces himself and we have our conversation in fireside chat. But very excited that he's able to join us. And as we're ready for him to join in just a moment, let me pass it over to Klaus. Was there anything else that you wanted to share about Troy, or maybe anything you wanted to add about the Zoom use case that I was sharing a moment ago?
No, I think more in relation to Troy as a person. He is a true entrepreneur at heart. You know, as you saw in the presentation last week, he was one of the persons that we actually featured because him as an individual, he has that entrepreneurial mindset, very much a builder mindset when he go and expand a business to international markets. He applied those principles very much when he actually go and do customer development with customers in Korea right now in his role at But what he's also extremely good at is actually building coalition and buy-in within organizations. And you really need to be able to do that when you expand internationally, because you're the person that goes far away from home and get these new insights around customers and needs and so forth. But translating that back to the organization can be very, very hard. And so that's oftentimes the big challenge for people that leads in expansion, to be able to push those localizations and the need for that to the mothership of the organization. I remember vividly, and keep me honest here, and were at Evernote. They were using, I believe, what was the product that they used with Evernote in terms of systems with the computers? Remind me again.
That's the story I was going to ask during the fireside chat we have, but it had to do with using Microsoft Windows versus Mac.
Exactly. And they realized that in Asia it was more Microsoft Windows, and here in the US very much Mac focused, right? And so in order to develop for the Asian market, they have to pivot over and spend more resources in developing for Microsoft, right? But they didn't really see that in the US. So he actually went up to the founder and CEO of Evernote and then gave him a computer with that system and told him, okay, you try and use the application there with the system that they're using in Asia, and see if it actually functions well. And obviously him seeing that it didn't really work well with the application, he also realized, okay, we actually need to do more investments into developing for this specific system. Otherwise, we won't be successful when it comes to an expansion into Asia. So being very forceful as an international expansion leaders is absolutely required, because the founders or the leadership at home does not necessarily understand what's happening on the ground. So you have to be very, very proactive as a business professional there. But also in terms of the culture mindset is certainly something that Troy developed very much, through his early sort of travel days to Korea when he was on a 2-year mission in Korea in the early 90s. Those formative experiences shapes you a lot as a business professional, and all of a sudden brings that new perspective on the world, and also understanding that things are very different in compared to your home or where you grew up, right? So it's really, really important that you bring in leaders in your organization if you're building a business that has more of that international and global mindset, because that in the future will help you scale faster to international markets once you get ready for that journey. And so we often talk about, when it comes to building a startup, you have to bring in people with a diverse set of perspectives and mindsets in viewing business differently, but also how to solve problems differently. And so for you to be successful, if you're building a company in Korea, just hiring Korean people into your organization will move you towards building much more of a local oriented business, both in terms of how you build a product, obviously how you build a team, but certainly also how you build your organizational culture. And so to mitigate from that, you need to diversify your team. That allows you to build much more of a global product, a flexible product, a team that is more diverse, that can solve problems with multiple different perspectives in mind, but also being able to have a culture that is much more universally, that are appealing much more universally to an employee base of different cultures, right? So being very mindful of those things are absolutely critical here. And I can see Troy here is calling in. We're praising you a bit here, Troy. Hopefully not too much, but we just talked a bit about your experience having led expansion for Weebly, Evernote, and now your 2-year mission in Korea where you actually learn Korean. So you often surprise people with that, right? So, and also right now, I believe, Troy, you guys are already expanding into Korea at the moment, right? I believe you hired someone here as well because you're very bullish about the Korean market when it comes to bringing into Asia. Correct? Oh, you're on mute.
Okay,
Yeah,
seems like our special guest Troy is here now. How are you, Troy?
Hello. 안녕하십니까. 만나서 반갑습니다.
Yes, the Korean is pretty good. Okay, so I think you are in the road.
Yes, yeah. But I'm excited to be talking with all of you, and probably as Klaus has told you, I absolutely love Korea and have done a lot of business in Korea and beyond, but I have a special place in my heart for Korea. So thank you.
Okay. So I think we can, Aaron, I think you can start today's sessions with the fire chat with Aaron, with Troy. And why don't you start it with Troy, okay?
Sounds good. Thank you, Dojun. So Troy, I'm going to be taking the fireside chat part of things and just going through a few different questions. We did read a bio for you just so you know that gave a little bit background on you. But one thing that we didn't talk as much about that we wanted to save maybe a little bit for your own words that would be a good starting point is to hear a little bit more about your formative experience in Korea and how that sort of created this lifelong connection that's translated into business. I think that would be a great place to start. So we'd love to hear a little bit about that story shared with everyone.
Yeah. Thanks for asking because, as I said, Korea is very special to me. I first went to Korea when I was only 19 years old. And I went in I'm going to date myself here, but I went in 1991 to 1993. I lived in Korea. 아주 옛날에, a very long time ago. And I lived in both Seoul. Actually, my first place that I lived was Pangnam-dong, which was kind of more north in Seoul. And I also lived out in Gangwon-do, Wonju. So I got kind of a good mix of both big city Seoul, but also a little more 시골, country. And during that 2 years, I really took a special liking to, and I would almost say a love of Korean culture. It was very interesting for me because obviously I'm American. I was, raised in America. And one of the, I think, weaknesses that Americans have is we think, it's almost like Chinese are very much this way also. You grow up kind of believing that the world is all just the U.S. Like the U.S. is everything, right? Because it's such a big market and we have Hollywood and all this stuff, right? You think you're kind of, big enough that everything is revolving or about America, right? And when I went to Korea at 19 years old, I got a very deep appreciation for a culture that was very, very different than my own. And it really woke me up to how big the world really is. And I would say that really shaped the rest of my life and career because as you probably read in my bio, the value that I add to companies is helping companies go into different markets, into the international markets, which is why I'm such good friends with you, Aaron and Klaus and 10X and what you guys are all about. That really became the focus of my career, and I love it. And Korea was the first country or first culture to really wake me up to how big the world was and how important different cultures were in life and in business. So
awesome. So because we know each other well, I appreciate that I have a few different stories that I think would be just really great to have you tell a little bit about just some of your career lessons. And so, maybe a good place to start also is just to put things into context. And I think you're a great person to talk about this because you understand both sides. Is talk maybe a little bit about some of the differences you recognize between Korean business culture and U.S. business culture, or just other business cultures in other countries.
Yeah. And this is something that I think if you're going to do international business, this can become a little bit of a competitive advantage to pay attention to the differences and to embrace the differences between the cultures. So I would say Korea is very different, right? Korea is very unique. It has a very unique culture. And there's so much to learn about a new culture. And I would say one of the biggest things that I learned in Korea was the importance of relationships. And of course, in the U.S., we have relationships, and relationships are important. But I would say in Korea that relationships are more deep and more important. And that was something that I had to learn as an American coming to for me, a foreign country, right? But I would say that building relationships before jumping into business was one of the things I had to change about, my approach. And also, I think one of the big differences that I noticed early on, and I think this is changing in Korea, but me, from a partnerships perspective, I'm always looking for a win-win situation. And Korea has been through a lot historically, right? There's just a lot of history there with Japan occupation, and even prior to Japan occupation, there's been a lot of, just wars and conflicts and stuff like that in Korea. So I think trust is hard to gain as a 외국인 in Korea, as a foreigner. And I think that this was something that I had to really understand, number one, and then figure out how to gain trust in Korea. And the way that I found that was really a good way to gain trust in Korea and create win-win deals between my company and other companies in Korea, I think, number one, me knowing the language is a great thing. It shows that I have a deep respect for Korea and just the culture. And also understanding the cultural nuances in Korea is a competitive advantage that I have over other 외국인들. I kind of know how to operate in the Korean environment. And I do this in any country I go to. Obviously, the only other language I know than English is Korean, so that's good for me in Korea. But in other countries like Indonesia or India, I really spend a lot of time to learn the cultural nuances from a business perspective so that I can build trust with people and be able to do deals with different companies around the world. If you're looking to do international business, I would really suggest that you become a student of culture, because culture is so vitally important to doing business. And I think if you pay attention to that and make that kind of your superpower, that you can do really well. but it takes time and it takes effort and it takes, frankly, having an interest in other cultures to be successful, a genuine interest. I don't do it just to get ahead. I don't pay attention to other cultures just for me. I pay attention to other cultures because I'm genuinely interested in them. And a byproduct of that is success in business, in my humble opinion.
So along those lines, I think this shows me that you practice what you preach, right? I recall hearing you talk recently to a group with one of our programs, and you talked about, I guess the part of what I'm getting at is it's not just this curiosity to help learn a market, but it's not a static thing. It continues. And I heard you mention as you were looking to expand into Korea, you're like, I know the Korean market, but the last time I was doing anything related to that was 5 years ago, and things change. And so you have to revisit the process. And so tell me a little bit more about that, because I think that's a great representation of the mindset you're speaking about.
Yeah, that's a great point, Aaron. And I was, the way I illustrate this point is I was talking to an event here in Silicon Valley of Koreans in Silicon Valley, I think was the name. And I actually was a speaker. I was the only Wehagugin speaker because I was like an honorary Korean at that thing. But it was an audience of maybe 300 people, right? And they were all Korean. But many of those people had been living in America for years. Some people had only been in America for a few short months. But the way I illustrated it to them is one of my interns in Korea taught me a cool word, hekjem, right? It was a hip word. It was new, right? And I asked the audience to raise their hand. And mind you, these were all fluent Koreans, right? Native Koreans. And I asked the audience to be honest, like how many people had heard the word hekjem? Nuclear fun, right? And only like 3 or 4 people raised their hand in the audience. And the reason that I highlighted that is some of those people had been in Korea a few short months ago, but this word was brand new. Even a native Korean, if you're outside of Korea for any period of time, the market moves on and you need to learn the market again, right? So
I think we lost Troy for a second there. While he's coming back,
Latin America.
Oh, can you, Troy? We lost you for a minute there.
Sorry.
You had just you had actually just said it was a good ending because you had a really great quote that I actually wrote down. That was about how the market moves on and you need to learn the market again. And then right after that is kind of where we lost you. So. Okay. You continue from there. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was saying that, especially as a foreigner, as a Wehagugin in any market, it's so important that you don't make assumptions. What may have been true 2 years ago, and you guys know this living in Korea, how fast does Korea progress and change as a marketplace? Extremely quickly. And so it's important that you don't make assumptions, that you don't get too proud about what you think you know, right? It's important, and with now going into Korea, I'm not making any assumptions about what I know about Korea. I'm trusting people that I have hired in Korea to guide me and educate me on what's going on now in Korea. COVID has changed everything, but it's changed each country differently. So I think it's vitally important that you become a constant student. You're never done learning about marketplaces and how to work in them. So, a good example is when I was with Evernote, we did a lot of live events in Korea. Now that's totally different. So we're figuring out how to engage with Koreans that want to learn about but in a very different way. It more like this, remote, and being able to talk on Zoom and different community sites that have come up over the years in Korea that didn't exist back then, right? So it's important in any market that you're going into, and especially if you want to come into the US, something that is very interesting about the US is Korea is, and many markets around the world are very homogeneous. They're if you're marketing in Seoul, you can do the same thing in Busan and have similar success. In America, America is like 10 different markets all wrapped into one country. Very different focuses that you need to figure out. How do you market to Hispanic people that are from Latin America? How do you market to people that are in America from Europe? How do you market to people that have, that have lived in America their whole lives? Different levels of society, right? All of those things you need to kind of understand and learn in America more so than you do in Korea. So that's kind of something that you can really be inquisitive and ask people to help you with. And the cool thing about Silicon Valley especially is people in Silicon Valley are very happy to help. So make friends, network, and connect with people in Silicon Valley, and they'll be happy to help you figure these things out. And the great thing is in Korea, for me, I have a ton of Korean friends that are venture capitalists, that are entrepreneurs, that help me learn the Korean market as well. So I think networking and connections is one of the most important things that you can do to help yourself in a new marketplace.
So there was a little story that as right before you came on, that Klaus was referencing that I'd love to go back to, because I think it fits a little bit within this concept you've been talking about, the theme of not making assumptions and truly needing to understand things, and to a certain extent, putting yourself in the right shoes. And I'll set this up for you to tell a little bit more detail, but you were in a situation where you, in understanding different markets in Asia, realized the importance of having a very well-functioning, well-designed Evernote version desktop application or laptop application that worked on Windows. But at Evernote, all of the designers, all the engineers used Mac. And you also had your CEO, Phil Libin, who also was very committed to Mac. And you came up with a very creative way to help him understand the needs. So I'd love to have you tell that story.
Yes, and I think that people will understand this, especially this was in 2012, so a little while ago. In Korea, not many people at all had Macs. In India, hardly anyone had Macs. Like all throughout Asia, frankly, it was a Windows region. And the problem that I ran into, as you said, with my CEO, with people at my company in the Pombu, the Ponsa, the headquarters, is we were all Mac users, almost exclusively. There wasn't one Windows machine. The only Windows machines at Evernote were the Windows development team, which was maybe like 8 people out of 300 and some odd people, right? And I was doing business all throughout Asia, and I was constantly being told that our product was not as good on Windows as it was on Mac. And please fix that, right? And so what I did, at first it was a little frustrating because I would tell people and nothing would happen. So what I did is I went out and I purchased a really nice Windows machine. I purchased an Android phone, because the same thing with Android. Everyone was iOS, and nobody was Android at Evernote. So I purchased these two devices, and I committed my CEO to use a Windows machine and an Android device for 1 week solid. No cheating, right? And so I purchased those devices, got them all set up with all of his accounts and everything. And he used them for 1 week solid. And it was so helpful to everyone to know, for him to know the pain that people were feeling with our product on Windows and on Android. And he got it, he understood it after that experiment, and then he committed more resources to Windows and to Android, and it really turned around our product for those markets. And I would just say, if you're building product, make sure that you understand what your user is experiencing in different markets, because you're going to get different experiences in different markets. But truly intimately understand what people are experiencing with your product and where you may need to improve. If we wouldn't have improved, I don't think we would have seen the crazy awesome success that we did in Asia. So it was really strategically important that we made that change. And the only way I could get them to understand was to have them experience the same pain that our users were experiencing. And you know, it was a little crazy for me to do that, but it ended up working really well.
Yeah, you know, and that actually reminds us of a story that Klaus and I heard in our research for our book Global Class that actually had to do with the Korean market. Whereas we were speaking to a former Airbnb executive from Asia Pacific, and she coordinated basically a focus group, and coordinated the whole C-suite, including the CEO, to come over to Korea and look through a two-way mirror and observe Korean customers using their app to truly understand the importance of adapting. So there's tons of value in what you're saying. Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think everyone listening at this point knows, you know, one of your core skills is being a storyteller. And I love hearing your stories. And probably the one that is my favorite out of all of them has to do with what we in our book call the localization discovery process, where you need to really truly understand a market. I believe you had referred to it previously as like a listening tour that you do.
Yeah.
And in particular, my favorite part of the story is when you went to India, when you were looking to launch Evernote in India, you had done certain research from afar as it related to credit cards in India. Yeah. And then you actually went there in person. And, you know, would love to hear a little bit more about your methodology around that listening tour or localization discovery, as well as the story in India that I won't give away the punchline for. So,
yeah. This was a great one, and I think that this applies to any market, right? You can do a lot of research on the internet for particular markets, and I had done that for India. And what the research was telling me is that not many people were using or even had credit cards in India. And of course, that presents a problem for a SaaS company that is taking payments through only credit cards, right? So that was a real discouraging thing, I'll say at first, when I did that research on the internet. But as you said, Aaron, you know, part of my process is to first do research and get a lot of data on any market that I'm looking at entering. But then the most critical part after I do that research is to go visit that country, spend about a week meeting with a wide variety of people. So I'll typically meet with a lot of venture capitalists. I'll meet with a lot of government people. I'll meet with a lot of entrepreneurs in that market. And those three people can help you learn a ton about that marketplace. But another thing that I do is I talk with all of my taxi drivers. I try to get to know them as much as possible. I try to ask them about what their day looks like. Back then, I would ask them about what applications they're using on their phone. And it would help me learn what is the average person, how do they use their phones? And whenever I was in Korea, I would ride the subway and I would be watching how people were using their phone. What were they doing? Were they playing a game? Were they studying for school? Were they taking notes about something? I would try to understand what are the usage behaviors in real life. And the thing I learned in India is that, as it turns out, as I was asking a lot of people if they had a credit card, everyone that I asked told me, yes, I have a credit card, but I would never use it. And I would say, wait. You have a credit card, but you would never use it. Why? Why would you never use a credit card? Because to me, as an American, we use credit cards for everything. And I know in Korea, so do you now. So I was curious. Why would you never use a credit card if you have it? And as it turns out, it was a cultural thing. Everyone's aunt had told them a story about how someone in their family, a distant relative, had used a credit card, got into a lot of debt, and gotten into trouble with that debt. And so that was a revelation to me that you could not learn from Google or Naver searches, right? Like that just didn't exist. But what it did is it gave me an idea of really what was happening in that marketplace. And then I kept asking, every time I went to India, I would ask people about credit card usage. And in India, a company called Paytm became really big. And I don't know if you guys know this, but in India, they outlawed a certain level of cash and below. So like it was like Manan, Omanan Jari, they outlawed them. You couldn't use them anymore. And Paytm became a company that was facilitating payments. And in order to work with Paytm, you had to use a credit card. And in India, overnight, people started using credit cards. And now everyone in India uses credit cards without any problem. So understanding a market on that level is extremely important. You can't just rely on only the research you do from afar. You have to get on an airplane and go see things in person and truly understand what's going on in that marketplace, because things can change extremely quickly in these markets.
That's great advice. So obviously this understanding for you as a business leader is key, but one of the core roles that you have as the engine behind international is being able to bridge between local markets and local teams, as well as, excuse my Korean, it was Pongsa, is that how you say headquarters?
The Pongsa, yeah, the headquarters, yeah.
Right. So how do you bridge between those? I know as an example you shared that story about Phil Libin with Windows devices versus and Android devices versus Mac, but what are some other ways that you can build that bridge, and what do you need to be mindful of?
Yeah, one of the things that I did is we did our first hackathon in the world was done at Yonsei University, and when I got that going, I invited Phil Libin over to be a judge in that hackathon. But what it did is it really showed him the potential in the Korean market and how important Korea could be to us as a focus market. So I think bringing executives over to different markets and helping them firsthand see the opportunities that are there was really important. As well as listening to your users in different markets and bringing that feedback back to the Ponbu I think I said that wrong. I think it's the Pumbu. You guys will have to correct me. It's the
Pumbu.
Pumbu is kind of the headquarters. But bringing that back, that feedback from the market, and letting people know what people are saying about your product in different marketplaces was extremely important for me to do. So I would create like a weekly report. All of my teams in Asia would aggregate comments and requests from the market, and we would put that into a weekly report that I would then give to our product team. And I would kind of highlight the things that I thought were important. So communication is in my role is extremely important. It's really, really important because when you think about it, a developer or a product person doesn't get the luxury or the example to be able to go out to and travel a lot and see different markets. So you need to bring those learnings back to them and paint a picture for them of how important these things can be. And just as an example, when I did the first ever hackathon at Yonsei Teihakyo, we then started doing hackathons worldwide in Europe, in Latin America, all throughout Asia. And we became known as a company that was doing a ton of hackathons all over the world. But it was only until I did it and communicated it back as to how cool it was and how effective it was at engaging with certain marketplaces that it became a thing, and then it became something that we put into a process and a playbook that we could do all over the world. So that was kind of an example of how important it is to communicate that back to the company. Another thing, just one other example, it's when you're in a big market like China or the US, people tend to ignore the rest of the world, right? So whenever Chinese New Year would happen, or the Lunar New Year, I would do red envelopes for everyone at our headquarters with a little chocolate gold coin in a red envelope with Hanja all over the envelope saying, just Happy New Year. And that was a way for me to remind people that the world is very big and much bigger than just our office in Silicon Valley, right? And so observing holidays, I would do that for Diwali, which is a big holiday in India. I would also do that, and we had a few Indian employees in Silicon Valley, and they would dress up in their traditional clothing, and we would celebrate Diwali at lunch when that was happening and when it was appropriate. And that was a way for people just to kind of like understand that it's a really big world. And I think if you're Korean going to America, you can do the same thing, and help people remember that it's a big world out there and we need to pay attention to what's going on in these different markets.
Absolutely. I mean, culture can be an amazing bridge.
Yeah,
absolutely. And also just to highlight one of the things that you had said, because Klaus and I believe this is one of the big hallmarks of global class companies, and that's that innovation happens two ways. It's not just headquarters saying, oh, this is what we're going to do and we're going to integrate this across the whole globe. It's the ability to identify these best practices like you shared from even smaller markets and be able to have that be used globally, like with the hackathons that you talked about.
yeah. So can I give you one other example?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
That just came to mind. I knew and still know, but the former two CEOs of Kakao Talk, right? And this is a good example of not understanding the market outside of your home market. So Kakao Talk means chocolate, right? It's a great meaning in Korean. But in in English, well, not English, but in Spanish, caca means dong, shit, you know? It's not a good meaning. And everyone in America knows that. Everyone in Europe knows that caca is dong. So literally, the name Kakaotalk anywhere in Europe or North America, even Canada, is shit talk, dong talk, right? And I told both CEOs that this was the case. And they kept telling me, no, it means chocolate, it means chocolate. And I said, I know, but if you changed your name for international to just K-Talk or something like that, it would make a huge difference. And of course, the famous story is that Kakaotalk has never become big outside of Korea. And I really believe that just the name and not understanding what the name means in other cultures and other languages was a big problem in that international endeavor. It never happened because I told my wife to download Kakaotalk and she laughed at me because the name sounds horrible. So that's an example of you need to go to these other markets and understand and have someone like me tell you your name is not good in the international markets and kind of understand why and ask a ton of questions and then make a strategic decision. Is it worth changing our name for Europe and, you know, outside of Korea? And I believe that would have been a very good move because I believe that Kakaotalk had one of the best technologies for a chat app, but because of the name, it was very difficult to become viral outside of Korea. So that's a good example of what I'm talking about.
Sure. So a lot of your role, besides being that bridge, was really figuring out what things needed to be localized for the different markets you were entering. And I think a couple examples that were always interesting to me as you were entering different Asian markets. One was this idea of giving pins, physical pins, to customers. I think this might have been in Taiwan, who were using the premium product. And also this notion of having conferences and how, you know, the Evernote at the time was very focused on their big corporate conference that happened at headquarters, but you were able to kind of show a shift in their importance of having it in other parts of the world. I'd love for you to share a couple of those localizations and how they contributed to the success of the company.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm glad you brought that up. I probably would have forgot the pins, but the pins were pretty critical.
Yeah.
The situation, and maybe many of you will understand this, but even back in 2012, Koreans and Taiwanese and Indian people in those markets were not accustomed to paying for software. Paying for software was not cool. It was not something you did, and you avoided it at all costs, right? The market had not come around to paying for software yet. Now, America came around to paying for software. We were the same way, by the way, before Apple iStore, the Apple Store. Mm-hmm. When the Apple Store came along, they charged $1, I think it was, usually for most apps. And that's when Americans started to make a shift and get comfortable with paying for an application. But before that, we were the same. We didn't want to pay. The internet made us think everything was free, right? So I came up with an idea, and I noticed that whenever I would meet people that were paying for Evernote, that were actually paying premium users, they would open up their phone, and in the application, if you look at your profile, it would show, it had a little badge that showed that you were a premium user. And I noticed that they were very proud of being a premium user. And so I said, okay, maybe what we can do here is make paying for premium something that's really cool that you want to show your friends. You want to brag about it. It's almost like buying a nice pair of shoes or a nice bag if you're a female and you want like a really nice Hermes bag, right, to show off. So we made it more of a status symbol, more of a you were premium and you were paying for it, therefore you were cool amongst your peers, right? So we came up with this idea of having a really cool pin that you could put on your backpack or your bag. And it was an outward way of showing that you were paying for a product, which made you seem like a little more successful and like you were investing in your future. You were investing in your productivity, right? And that was a big change. And as people got these pins that we were sending to them, they started to show off, and they would put it on Twitter. They would put it on Facebook and show people that they were paying for premium. And it became kind of like a cool, in English, we call it the cool kids club. So now you were cool. You were kind of like, it was payback to be paying for premium of Evernote. And it became kind of like a club. And that worked really, really well for us. And that was totally localized. We never did that in America. We never did that in Europe because those markets don't respond to that. But Asia and Latin America did. And so that was a hyper localization that we did that was very, very successful. And then kind of similar to that, in Europe and in America, we did one conference a year. We called it a global conference. We did it in San Francisco. And it cost us about $2.5 million to do this conference in San Francisco. And we had about 1,000 attendees that would come from all over the world and do this 2-day conference. I noticed that in Korea and in Taiwan, Singapore, India, and Latin America, people loved to come out and to events live. They just loved it. It was really fun to do, right? And so I leaned into that and said, why don't we try to do a meetup? So we started doing meetups first, and we would get 40 people. Then the next meetup, we'd get 150 people. And then I had a good friend in Korea, Mr. Hong Sung Nim, and he said to me, let's not do a meetup next. Let's do a conference. And I'm like, what? A conference? Talk to me. What do you mean, do a conference? And he said, let's do a conference. And I said, okay, I trust you. You know this market much better than me. And I gave a small budget to my team and Mr. Hong. And they put together a conference, and we had 1,000 people attend the first year. I was amazed. I couldn't believe it. And then the second year, we had 2,000 people attend, and we did it at COEX, which is the really big conference center in Korea. And then we did one in Taiwan, similar results. We did it in Singapore. We did it in India. And I brought Phil Libin, our CEO, over to, I think it was the Korean conference. He could not believe what we were doing. And I'll tell you guys, my budget that I gave my team was $5,000. That's it. And they got sponsors. They did everything they needed to kind of make this happen. And it was world class. And Phil Libin attended. He could not believe it. And on his way back to the hotel in the taxi cab, he told me, he said, Troy, I'm going to change our whole conference strategy. We're not going to do the one in San Francisco anymore. We're going to do a regional conference strategy based on what I'm seeing here. So we changed the whole strategy for Evernote for conferences by doing something local and figuring it out locally, and then showing the headquarters what was possible And then that really changed everything for us. And by the way, when we did these large conferences, another strategy that I had was PR, public relations, and press. We would get all the press to come to our conferences and cover it as a major event. And that gave us so many new users. At our peak, at our height, we were getting anywhere from 120 to 130,000 new users every day. And a lot of that was due to press and coverage and stuff like that. So it worked very, very well.
That's incredible. So
and again, I guess I should underscore that it was not my idea. That's the important thing to recognize. It wasn't my idea. It wasn't someone from the headquarters idea. That came from local and listening to my team and to key contacts and relationships that I had developed in market. So it's important that you don't try to do everything from the headquarters. You need to listen to the people that are in that market and trust them and let them experiment. And when things work, it can be amazing, but you have to listen to those local markets.
Absolutely. Yeah, the way we characterize it in some of our work is the importance of allowing for autonomy and trust to exist.
Yeah. Very much.
So there are two questions I wanted to ask before we open it up to some of the question from attendees. So one, as you were kind of alluding to previously in terms of influencer markets and such. So a lot of the attendees are students, right? So they tend to be influencers, and so we've been talking a lot about Evernote, but would love to have you share a little bit more about and some of the exciting things that are happening there.
Yeah, I'm going to try to transition over here to my wireless earbuds here. We'll see if hopefully this works. We will see. Yep. Okay, looks like it's making the connection.
Yep, we can hear you. Yep.
Oh, okay, cool. I can hear you well also. So, yeah. Is an interesting product. We created it in response to the pandemic, to Corona, with everyone doing this on Zoom, Skype, whatever it may be, like doing remote video calls. We noticed that there was this phenomenon that people are talking about called Zoom fatigue. Everyone was tired of all these calls that they were doing every day. It was boring. It was not interesting. And again, Phil Libin of Evernote is the CEO of So I've been with Phil for many years. We have a great relationship of building companies together. And he came up with the idea of making allowing people to just look better on video. And so what it allows you to do is in a Zoom call or a video call, you can put a slide up next to you. So I would have a slide here and it looks like it's behind me, almost like I'm on the news and I'm a newscaster, right? So it allows people to create a very professional video presence, which is so important now after Corona, because job interviews mostly are done on Zoom, partnership discussions, you name it, right? Like all of these interactions that we used to do in person are now done on video. So is a product that allows people to just look really good on video. Now, I'm currently learning, like, what does that mean for Korea? What does that mean for different markets around the world? And what does it mean after COVID, right? Like after COVID's done, what do we do, right? Like how do we make the case that this is something that you need? But all of you as 대학생들, you're in an interesting time in the world. you're entering, you will be entering the workplace at a time when we're all trying to figure out how to work going forward. Most businesses traditionally, especially in Korea, were very oriented toward everyone being in the same location. Well, as it turns out, as we learned through Corona, that's not necessarily, for a lot of types of businesses like knowledge workers, it's not really required. And I think employees are changing their requirements of what they want in life. And so I think you're going into the workplace at a very, very interesting point in time. And the skill of professional video presence, I think, is extremely important to learn so that you look impressive on video. And it can give you a differentiator between all the other people that you're competing with to get a job. And I think that's important. And in fact, back in the before times when I would speak at major universities all over Asia, one of the common questions that I would get from the audience, from students, is, Troy, how do we differentiate ourselves from all the other people that are graduating and looking for jobs? And I think this is a great way that you can differentiate yourself, is to pay attention to the changing environment and become sharply impressive on video. I think that is a way that you can really set yourself apart and be different. So I would encourage all of you to check out, it's spelled mmHMM.app is the URL. And if you go and kind of download and just play with it, it's a great way to submit your projects for university, but it's also a great tool to have as you interview for jobs. It can make you look really professional and different than all the other students that are interviewing for jobs.
Awesome. I shared the URL you just gave in the chat. That actually ties really well into the last question I was going to have before we open it up. Because one, you had said the line, you're at an interesting time in the world because of the pandemic and how things are changing. But I think what's also particularly unique that maybe some of the students in the audience don't fully understand is that they're also at a very interesting place in the world too. That when you look at how, and we heard this in conversations with executives as part of our book, they see Korea as an influencer market for other markets, not only in the region but other places. And I think there are lots more examples of that are emerging. And so we'd love to just get some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Korea is the only country post all the wars that we had that has made the transition from developing country to developed country. The only country, right? And I have been lucky enough to actually see this whole transition happen. When I was in Korea in 1991, it was a totally different place. It was more like, I think of it, it was more like Taiwan. It was more like Taiwan. But now it is a first world country. And it's the only country that has actually made that transition. So I think that's a special thing and something to really celebrate. And it's really important. Now, I also agree with you, Aaron, that the influence that Korea now has, whether it be in music, movies, culture, is huge. In fact, I know like Phil Libben loves Korean cinema. You know, whether it be all the stuff on Netflix that he watches, he's always telling me like, have you seen this? Have you seen that? All these amazing Korean, it's pop culture, right? Like it's become like a pop culture hit around the world. And I think that is very different than just a few short years ago. And I think it opens up a lot of opportunity for Korea and you as students going into the marketplace to do some really interesting things really creative deals, really creative relationships that you can make now around the world, whereas before it was kind of difficult to do. But now you guys are the cool kids on the block, as we say. You're the ones that people want to get to know better, you know. And I think that I would suggest that you really share your culture with the world, but also learn about other people's culture. If you do that, if you become a student of culture and an ambassador of your culture, you'll be unstoppable. You'll be able to do amazing things in the global marketplace. So I think that's a very special, you guys are, definitely at a very special time in the evolution of Korea. And another thing that I'll just add to that, in the past, from a Korean perspective, if you graduate from school and don't get a job with Samsung or Hyundai or LG, one of the chaebol, it was viewed as though that was like a failure. And I think I want you guys to not think that, because you have opportunities now, not just with chaebol within Korea. You all have tremendous opportunities with global companies from Europe, from the US, from anywhere in the world. And don't limit yourself in what you think your opportunities are. I think if you have a global mindset, and I would say buy the book from 10X, The Global Class, right? Because this is a book that gives you a blueprint of how to go global. And I would encourage all of you in your career to think globally, not just Korea. And I think that if you do that, that you'll be able to unlock success that wasn't available to you before, that now is freely available to you if you change your mindset to not be just Korea, but more global. I think that's an important, I guess, encouragement that I would give to you. I think it's a good opportunity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you so much, Troy. I know, Professor Dojun, you have some questions that you wanted to share as well. So we'd love to transition over to those.
Okay, Troy, it was a great, your insight. I mean, basically whatever you say is true. I mean, even it is true for your own land and your own country, but also you have to go out and you have to learn what the country you are trying to market it, and you have to go there. You have to find out their cultures and understanding what they are doing. I really appreciate your storytelling. I mean, I think also your advice to the Korean students, and they probably don't realize how much opportunity they have. I mean,
Yes.
as a Koreans, but now all of the country, I mean, all of the world, the companies are looking for the Korean guys. Who
Yes.
is
Very true.
selling their product in Korea, because whatever your product is selling in Korea, then that can be selling to the all over the world, because there is a movie and cultures and everything. I mean, they are using the product. So now the Korean drama is the stage for the people trying to marketing their product. It's like a 007 movie, something like
Yes,
that.
yes. For cars, yes, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. That's
Professor,
right.
you're exactly right. Yeah.
Okay, I went to state for 1984, and I came back to Korea 2001, and I joined the Samsung Electronics, and I worked for them about 15 years as an executive.
Wow.
Yeah. So and also I learned the global business as a semiconductors, the system LSI and the LED business. So I traveled all over the world. I mean, I'm a million milers as a Samsung guy.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, so I think that your chatting with Aaron was excellent, and I think that can give us a lot of insight to the professors and then the students in the KAIST, and also alumni. They are looking they wanted to go out and they wanted to expanding their business in outside, but I mean, they never had those kind of experiences. That's the main reason I made this the conference, this forum. I invited the 10 most distinguished people in the world of the startups and the entrepreneurship, and then I try to give them the insight how to be startups successfully. I mean, even in your country and even outside the country. So I think Cloud and Aaron is helping us a lot to give them the new insight. Okay.
Yeah.
So
very good.
I have some questions to you from our students and the professors. So
okay.
Great. First one is the Asian countries such as Thailand and Japan, China boost the domestic platform with the great market shares. If foreign companies were to penetrate the Asian countries, what kind of the advice do you have for localization strategies? And do you know which companies succeed in the localizations?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, like, our philosophy is that if you build a sufficiently high quality product, right? And I think, like, a good example of this is like Kakaotalk, I think is at that level, right? If you build a sufficiently high quality product, then there's not a ton of product level localization that needs to be done. Maybe some, for instance, if you're in China, and you have a product that ties into social media, you would have to tie into Chinese social media, not Twitter or Facebook or things like that, right? So there's those kind of localizations, but really language obviously is important. And in fact, we're very young. We're only a year old, a little over a year old, but we've already localized into 12 different countries, 12 different languages, one of which being Korean. And I think that's very important to get right and do that with high quality. You guys know, and I'm sure understand, you've seen a lot of badly translated applications in Korean. Like Korean is a very, very difficult language. So to get it right is something that you really have to understand and pay attention to and have local help for. But I think we have focused traditionally, and this is just kind of our personal philosophy, Phil and me, is that if your product is sufficiently high enough quality in design and all that, that it's mainly language that you're focusing on and local market nuances that you need to tie into. So that's kind of our focus on that. But if you get it right, if you get it correct for a market, you will see that in your data. You will see the traction that you're getting. For instance, when we got Evernote correct, we saw an extremely high rate of downloads and new users in Korea that we hadn't seen before. And I think that's what you need to look at, is if you don't get that spike in new users and new downloads, then you need to keep working at it and figure out, and maybe you're not localized properly or enough. So I think that's kind of something that you need to pay attention to. But one thing that we did with Evernote in Korea and Japan and even China to a certain degree is I tried to tie the local culture in Korea to Evernote. And the way we did this is we kind of asked the question, why do people in Korea like Evernote so much? And the answers that we got from our users was 기록의 문화. Is 한국의 기록의 문화. You have that culture of recording things and writing things down. If you think about the 스님들 from many years ago, writing down the scriptures, right? There's this 기록의 문화, and I think that helped us localize marketing for those markets.
Okay. 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 The next one is there is another question for Asia. In Asia, there is a great demand and supply of the delivery services. Okay.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And there are many companies that experienced explosive growth. Do you have your eye on any delivery service company in Asia delivery market?
Oh, wow. You know, it's funny that Pedare Minjok is the name of a company, and it's so true, right? And I actually met the founders of Pedare Minjok a few years ago, but I think that Korea is a superpower of Korea is Pedare, right? And I think I don't know. I mean, I don't have my eye necessarily on those companies right now, because the way I view Korea and a lot of Asia as it relates to Pedar is it's kind of like done, like 잘했다, right? Like it's very competitive, right? And therefore it's very competitive. So I think there needs to be a next kind of iteration of value that can let new companies come in. But right now, I think it's extremely competitive, but very well done. I think it's definitely a superpower in Korea and beyond. Yeah.
So the following question is this. What kind of the strategy does an Asian delivery service company need in penetrating the global market?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the reasons that delivery companies have done so well in places like Korea is density of population, right? That's one of the things that we have. You've got Seoul accounting for a large proportion of the population, and that makes it logistically easier to make it work from a cost perspective, from a logistics standpoint, all of that. So I think if I were looking for a new market, if 잘했으니까, right? I think you guys know how to do it very well, but I would be looking for similar logistical situations in different markets. So for instance, you wouldn't come to America and try to do a delivery company in a state or a place that isn't dense. It needs to be a dense place. So New York would probably be a little bit better than San Francisco, although San Francisco is still pretty good. But I would be looking at kind of like the major cities and sticking to that for this type of a service. I think that would be very important. And I also think that a way to grab market share in a new market with that kind of a service is you have to start giving away stuff for free, which requires a lot of 투자 말이야. 투자 있어야 돼요. 큰 투자 없으면 잘 못해. So I think you have to have big money, and you have to give it away for free or near free for a little bit of time in order to get people to talk about it. And then once you get people talking about it, then it becomes very much easier. Now, I will also say that because of Corona, there was a major opportunity to gain market share, because most Americans did not use delivery services a lot before Corona. Sure, some people use them, but not like Korea, right? I think that Corona changed things where we were more willing to order food from a restaurant, for instance, and have it delivered. So like Grubhub is a very popular one. Uber Eats was formed and I think became much bigger because of Corona. So I would look for densely populated areas where the logistics can work. I think you need a lot of 투자 because it's crowded, right? And in order to gain market share, you would need to be able to do something for free for a little bit to get traction in a new market.
Okay. I think the next question is very related to your new business. The content market is very competitive these days, right? So there are a lot of the OTT companies in Asia countries, in addition to global OTT companies like Netflix and Disney. There are consumer concerns as there seems to be an excessive number of the OTT services. What kind of the change do you expect in global OTT market in the short term?
I think the major players that you're talking about, like Netflix, Disney Plus, and these kind of players, I think are well established. We're not going to change that. We're not going to, and the goal is not to create another OTT player or OTT company to compete directly with them. What we're doing is, so here's what changed. It used to be that you streamed from Netflix and you streamed from all these different services for entertainment. But what we noticed with Corona happening and the pandemic is you have a lot of business people that have to communicate like we're communicating right here on a phone call, etc. So what we're doing is we created something called TV. And if you can imagine what TV is something that you can use in a business, and it's that business's business content that's being created by the employees to communicate with each other. So imagine recorded updates from the engineering department, a recorded update from the marketing department for the whole company or for the boss. And you can share that much like Netflix, but it's your business's proprietary information that's only internal to your business. So we're taking a different angle on OTT service. It's not so much for entertainment, but it's more for asynchronous communication at a business level to help companies be better with remote workers that may be working from a different location, not the same office. So that's where we're kind of going strategically with it. And that's going to require us to sell directly into a B2B model, right? To kind of help companies realize the power of asynchronous communications that they can unlock with our product. So that's kind of where we're going with it.
Okay. That's very interesting. I mean, the OTT for the B2B business.
Yeah, right. That's proprietary to your business, right?
Oh, okay.
So it's all secure just to your business, and you can share with only the people you want to share. So to give you an example, we used to do one-on-one meetings. Our CEO, Phil, would do one-on-one meetings with key people in the organization, but we changed all of those meetings to be asynchronous. So I will record an update for Phil, he will watch it, and then he will reach out to me with comments and questions, etc. So I'm not wasting his time with the update, and we're only talking about what's important, what he really wants to talk about. So it's helping us be more efficient with our top executives' time. And I think that that's something that we're trying to educate the market on and help people be more efficient with their time.
Okay, I think it makes sense. I mean, when I was in the Samsung, I used to have a meeting all day, basically.
Yes, right.
9 to 5.
I know. Yes. Yes.
Okay, but I think if we can making the recording those meetings and share with the people, working people, because normally in the meeting is the people who making decisions, right? The VPs and the directors, but the directors has to go back and they have to transfer their meeting result, and then they have to have another meeting. So I think it's a consecutive meetings. It's like starting from the present, and then it will go down to the working level. So I think if we can the making OTT in the inside of the company, which is the CEO's meeting was recorded, and then they can be shared with some working level of the people. Then those VPs and the directors doesn't have to do the meeting again to transfer what the CEO said.
And yeah, that's very well said. And I'll just add that another neat thing about that scenario is that the people that are watching the recording can watch it at 1.5 speed, so a little bit faster, so it doesn't take as long. So if it's a 45-minute meeting, if you watch it at 1.5 speed, it may be 30 minutes to watch it all. And they can watch it whenever is convenient for them. So you don't have to get everyone together at the same time. They might want to watch it late at night, early in the morning. You know, it can become more flexible with this new superpower of recorded video. So yeah, I think you're exactly right.
Okay, I think that will be useful if that can be working. I mean, but I think that they need some kind of the circumstance. They have to prepare for that, recording those meetings and then the uploading those kind of things. But I think that's very interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
the next one is probably the question to the Aarons. Which work management tool does 10X use?
So when you say work management, referring to like collaboration tools and
I mean whatever tools your company 10X is using. That's the question from the students.
Sure. So we have some pretty strict rules when it comes to this to help with efficiency. So email is great for many reasons, but it's not ideal. And so when we're communicating with outside parties, we use email. But internally, where most of our communication happens, we use Slack, which is a great tool that's very helpful to allow us to separate different topics of conversation, share different things from the more fun, random thoughts to things related to meetings or updates on projects, and be able to include the right people in specific conversation. But you know, what's interesting also in particular in Klaus and my case, even though we live very close to each other, because of the restrictions of the pandemic, we had literally in the thousands of meetings over the last year and a half. And even in writing our book, I think we only met face-to-face 2 or 3 times. And so we used Zoom in particular a lot in order to facilitate. Klaus, I don't know if you want to share some of your thoughts.
Sure, and I don't know, maybe it's because Aaron don't want to meet with me in person. I'm not sure. But
maybe.
Exactly. But I think in terms of communication, right, what we like to do is sort of informalize communication a bit. So, for example, we have different channels for different types of communication. To Aaron's point about random things, we even have a random channel where people can share random insights or random stories or whatever that is to kind of sort of make communication just less sort of formal as it becomes much on email, right? Also, we like to celebrate things. So we even have a team celebration on Slack as well. So we want to make sure we share milestones, whether it's we interviewed 100 people for the book, or we have submitted our manuscript, or maybe there's even a holiday event happening in the Philippines where we have a lot of our team, where we make sure to celebrate them as well, to be culturally conscious as an organization, right? So for us, we, since we're working a lot from a distance, the way to build relationship is a bit more through the informal way of communicating. So that's extremely important versus you oftentimes see, at least in Japan with our clients, everything is kind of formal all the time, the way they meet, and so it's kind of interesting to see the dynamics in those type of business environments. At the very least here, Silicon Valley approach often is very informal. We even have meetings over lunch, which is not always common in Japan, but we like to have our lunchbox meetings with not necessarily fancy food, but just a basic sandwich. We like to stick our teeth in basic sandwiches here. So I think, at the very least in the Bay Area and Silicon Valley, where Troy has worked for many, many years, and I think you can recognize that as well as Aaron and myself, for us, informality matters a lot when doing business.
Definitely true. Yeah.
I think this work management tools. I think there are tools like Slack and for the communication between teams, the teams, and as a just work. But I think Troy, I think as a executives, I mean if you making companies, I think culture is very important, and sharing the visions and sharing the information about what company is doing it, and who is my customers, and what is our strategy for marketing and sales, and then also how the other department is doing their jobs, and how those things is going along. And I think I developed the startup platforms which can have the business model canvas, and then inside the business model canvas, and then actually you can put it in your vision of the CEO, and also the information about your customers, and who is your customers, and what they want, and what is their problems. And then also there is the channel strategy, and then there is customer relationship, and also you can assign the jobs to the people and missions and the project, and then you can counting how the things is going on, and there will be a report comes in, and then you can making your marketing strategy. Starting from the past, and then 3C, and then SWOT, and then 5-Force, and then also STP, and then the 4P product, 4P the strategy. So I built up the platform, which is you can have all those information about your company and your strategy, and also information about your customers. Also, you can monitoring how your development is doing it, and your marketing is doing it, and then how the revenue streams comes on. I think we need more like it's like not only just management, not a work, only for there is a cultures coming in together. So then actually you don't need the meeting. Basically, there is everything is there, and then also you can using those tools for the OJT. I mean, you don't have to explain the new guys coming in and they're spending whole days, whole week, and what is our department doing, what is our something like that. So I think that's the one that I developed it as the Klaus and the Aaron saw that, and actually that thing is inside that platform. So I think we need the new kind of the manager tool, not only checking the schedule, not only the separating the cultures, but we need some platform which is sharing the informations with everybody basically. Then I think they will understanding it, and then they can applying that. So as you know what the development is doing it, then your salesman can apply those information to dealing with the customers. If the development knows that what the sales has a problem, then they can voluntarily changing the product and they make it's good for the salesman. I think that's the kind of the environment you have to providing it. I think that's the next type of the management tool is needed, isn't it, Troy? What do you think? Troy, we lost your voice. Yeah.
Oh, am I here?
Yeah. Okay, we can hear you now.
Okay, good. So I love what you just described, because the world has changed. The days are over that you can just tell an employee what to do and have them do it blindly. If you can educate an employee on what the vision is and what the overall story is and culture and everything, what is really driving the company from the top level, if you can communicate that effectively, you get so much more productivity. You don't waste as much time with employees doing stupid things because they just didn't know what the real vision was for the company, right? So Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that this is a change that's really happening globally. I think that's been the culture for a while in Silicon Valley, but I think it needs to go worldwide, because if you have an employee that truly understands the vision of the company, you get so much more high quality work out of that person than if they don't really understand the overall vision of the company and where you're going and why. If people understand why they're doing something, you're going to get so much more quality, so much more velocity of work out of those people than the other way of just saying, just do this blindly, you know? So yeah, I totally agree. And I would love to see whatever you've put together. I would love to see kind of what you're thinking and what you have, because that would be a tool I would want to use. So thanks for telling us about that.
Yeah, I mean, I built it up that platform based on my experience with the Samsung and then LSI Logic. I worked for them about 20 years, and then I go through so many meetings, and then the time to explain to the people, and the inefficiencies coming out from the people do not know what kind of information they need to know. So that's why I put up this platform. So the next time I will contact with you guys, and then I will explain more about it, and then probably we can discuss about this kind of the movement. I think this is truly needed for everybody in the world. I mean, you can improve the company efficiency by just to put it into this kind of platform into the company. I think I mean, as you just said, I mean, if you know what is going on and what the company is doing, then people normally voluntarily working for that.
Yeah, yes.
But totally. So that's the difference between the salaryman and then entrepreneurs. So I think that this is the only way you can making your working people, who your employee, he came to your company and we pay for them, but normally we want them. It's like a think as like a CEO. We always think, right? I mean, why don't you think as like a CEO, as like a owner, or as like a founder? But without providing information, how he can do that?
Yeah, exactly. You're totally right.
Yeah. So that's the philosophy of this platform. Actually, I'm trying to providing the informations, and everybody knows what they are doing and what the company is going and what is the customers doing it. Then I think I can make them think like a CEO and act like a CEO, something like that. So I think that's the way. So I will arrange some time we can discuss about this one later on.
I would really enjoy that. And I'll just say, number one, let's get connected, and we can get connected through Klaus and Aaron. I would also say to the students on the call, okay, this is an important thing. Listen carefully if you're a student. As you go throughout your career, you're going to be well served through developing relationships with people. Now, I'm a guy who's working, I've always worked at Silicon Valley companies. I've traveled the world. I know a lot of people. On a call like this that you're having with me, I would expect from all of you to connect with me on LinkedIn. Now, hey, I know that LinkedIn is not a thing in Korea, but if you want to be international, if you want to work internationally, and you have a call like this with someone like me, I would encourage you to not be 창피하다, to get some jashin and connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm just at LinkedIn/Troy Malone. So I'm very easy to find, and I would encourage all of you to connect with me and make a habit of any time you come across someone that's of interest to you that you think can be, a connection for you going forward in your career, please connect with them, because I can tell you, you guys are young, right? You're going into your careers. If you do that, you will see so much more success over the course of your career than if you don't connect with people and you're 창피하다 and don't do it. So please, I encourage you, number one, connect with me because I want to meet you. And number two, as you go forward, don't be afraid to connect with people. This is something, by the way, my daughter is in first year of Teihakyo, and this is something I'm teaching her. Whenever someone comes to your university and speaks, make sure that you connect with them on LinkedIn and thank them for speaking with you. And that can help create maybe a future job opportunity or someone that you can reach out to for help. That is something that I encourage you. Please, please, please do it.
Okay, thanks to Troy. And this is our last questions. If you are to choose one startup in Asia and you were most impressed with it, and which would be?
Okay, one comes to mind. Well, two come to mind. I have to pick two, okay? And I'll pick Korea specifically. And the reason I'm picking these companies is I know the founders very well. So you guys may be familiar with, you may not be old enough to be familiar with Between. Okay, Between was a social media application for couples, for bubudur, and
Troy, we lost it. We cannot hear you, Troy.
that I'm very
Okay.
so let me remember that Tada had some trouble with the government maybe a couple years ago, and they got shut down. But the CEO, the founder, did not take, we say, don't take no for an answer. Always keep pushing. And he pushed and pushed, and now Tada is becoming successful again, right? So I think Tada is one that I'm very impressed with. And the second one, any females in the class, I hope you have female students on this call, would recognize Zigzag, which is a fashion app that was acquired by Kako Fashion. And I also know the founder of Zigzag, and I think that what he did brilliantly was he used data to his advantage to really succeed in the fashion industry. And I think that Zigzag was another good example of a very determined founder who did not take no for an answer and kept pushing and pushing until he became a wild success. So I think that's another one that I'm very impressed with.
Okay, I think this is a very nice to talking with you. So I think is there anything the Troy or Aaron wants to talk about it?
I just want to say thank you, Troy. I really appreciate your great insights and your great stories, as always. Klaus, was there anything you wanted to share?
Sure. I mean, since we have a lot of students on today's call, I thought it would be a good time to share some recommendations as they're trying to enter into the workforce. You, as someone that has been obviously developed a professional career over many, many years, what are some of your top 3 recommendations for students entering the workforce today?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a very competitive marketplace. So the number 1 recommendation that I always make to university students is do things. And what I mean by that is, especially if you're looking for an international job at a company from Silicon Valley or a company from Europe, for instance, we value what you have accomplished much more than your education. Now, I know all of you are at KAIST, and KAIST, believe me, I know how amazing it is to be at KAIST. That's a very prestigious, amazing school. But I would say even more important than being at a top school is being able to show that you guys have accomplished things in your life, right? And what I mean by that is yes, do your schoolwork and make sure the professor here is really happy with you because of your schoolwork, but also look at other things that you can do above and beyond your schoolwork. Start a podcast, start a community, do something that you can show and talk about in a job interview, and that will make you very different than most anyone that's out there. Okay, so that's the first thing, is do things. I would also say learn how to talk about yourself and not be so chengpihada about it. Like, be proud of what you've accomplished and learn how to talk about yourself, not so that you're annoying, but that you can clearly communicate what your value is to a company. I'll give you a couple of examples. I use a formula. If you're in a job interview and someone says, tell me about something that you've accomplished that you're proud of, which is a common interview question, use the formula problem, solution, outcome. Tell them about what the problem was that the CEO or your hiring manager that you're working for had. Then explain to them what your solution was. And then, most importantly, tell them the outcome of what you did. And typically you'll want to say numbers, and if you can start talking about yourself in problem, solution, outcome, think about your past history and what you've been able to accomplish in that type of formula. That is very powerful in a job interview. And then lastly, and I think this is important, so please listen up. Never think of yourself as a job candidate, right? If you think of yourself as a job candidate, you're one of many candidates for that job. You want to present yourself more as a solution to the hiring manager's problem. Okay? This is a mindset change. And if you can make this mindset change, it will really change the way that you interview for jobs, and it'll change the type of jobs that you can get. Because a hiring manager is not looking to hire you or anyone. They're looking to solve a problem. If you understand what problem that hiring manager is looking to solve, you can then present yourself not as a candidate, but as a solution to their problem. And that changes the whole dynamic of the job interview process. So if you're going to do an interview for a job, study what the problem is that hiring manager is solving for, and you'll start talking a little bit different than all the other candidates for that position. And you will become the most attractive candidate for that position because you're talking about it in a very different way that most people don't talk about it in. And I think you're a solution. Be a solution, not a candidate. There's too many candidates out there. We want to find the people that can solve our problems as a hiring manager. If you think about it in that way, I think you'll have a lot more success in getting that dream job that you're going after. So those are my kind of 3 recommendations that I would say.
I actually think that's a very interesting, a couple of interesting recommendations, and it kind of reminds me of a meeting I set up for you, Troy, in terms of a candidate that could be a great hire for Korea. He had worked at a Korean startup in Silicon Valley, but he wanted to change over in product and work for a Silicon Valley-based company. And so I had a lot of conversation with him and coaching him about positioning himself to Silicon Valley companies. And one of the angles were that he understands the American market, but also the Korean market. So as a product person, he can really help companies localize into a new market, and in specific Korea, because that was his background. So I had a lot of conversation with him before actually meeting with Troy. And Troy, your conversation with him was probably around the problem solution conversation, right? Do you want to clarify a bit about how that interview went and how he went about that?
Yeah. I'll say I do a lot of interviews and I hire people frequently. And this person who came to me through you, Klaus, I was very impressed with him. He had done his homework, meaning he studied me as a person, as an executive. He knew, he had watched some of the videos that you can find of me speaking at events and things like that. So he kind of like understood me pretty well, how I think about things, what I talk about. And then he also did present a very compelling presentation, and he actually used to do his presentation. So he used my product to present to me, which I think also tells me that he's different than most of the other candidates that I would talk to. Now, as it turned out, I didn't really have a position currently for him, but he made a big impression on me, and he's staying in touch with me as we go forward. Like I told you guys, start to get to know people and just stay in touch with people. Even if they can't help you right now, it's valuable to keep them as a relationship. And he's doing that with me. And I would recommend him to any company. I'm really impressed with him. And I can tell you, as soon as I have a problem that I need to solve for that matches what he presented to me, I'll be reaching out to him and trying to recruit him into my company proactively. So that's really, really important. And I think the coaching that you gave him, Klaus, was really, it landed well. It was the right coaching, and he impressed me. Even though I didn't have a position for him right now, I would consider him as a top asset that I want to keep in touch with. I know I will want to do something with him in the future. So that's important. And that's another key thing to realize. If you interview for a job and don't get it, don't just leave that situation. Stay in touch with whoever is hiring, and develop a deeper relationship. Who knows what might happen 2, 3, 5 years from now? You may end up getting a great job from them. So think long-term, not short-term. Develop relationships over the course of your career, and it will bless you in the future with great opportunities.
That's some great insights, Troy. Thank you. I think, maybe to summarize a number of the things you were saying, one, the students on the call are at a very interesting time and also in a very great place geographically for what's happening in the world. And then to your point, just the importance of having that long-term view and thinking about relationships and the importance of building those at every opportunity. One thing I always tell my students is take advantage of the fact that you're students. People remember when they were students, and they like to help students out.
Yes,
so
very much.
Take it as much to your advantage as possible. So, but Troy, thank you. Dojun, I don't know if there was anything you wanted to say to encapsulate things.
I think, Troy, I really appreciate today that you came to us and give your insight about your experience, and also you gave a lot of the good advice to the students and what they have to do. I think this session will be watched by the KAIST students and the professors for a long time. I think this will be the very historical sessions we have, and you will be very famous in a long time because you gave a really sincere advice to the students, which is going to be always useful. So I really appreciate your help. And Aaron and Klaus, I really appreciate your speech and the sessions and leading this session. And is Troy, how often you come into Korea?
In the past 4 months, I've been to Korea twice.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Yeah, which is crazy because of Corona, but I got a special quarantine exemption for business purposes, and I was able to come to Korea. But my plan is to come to Korea always as much as I can because I love Korea, as you could imagine. I have a lot of friends in Korea, and I would love to come see you and your class in person someday.
Yeah.
Hopefully very soon. So I'll let
Please.
you know the next time
Yeah.
I'm coming.
Please. So let me know. I mean, I think I'm looking forward to take you as the invited speakers in my class, so they can learn what is really going on in the internationally and at the Silicon Valley. Okay. So as I said, let's keep in touch, and then we can have a talk and later on. And guys, I really appreciate, and I'm going to having this forum next year too. So I would like to you guys coming to us again and give us the great sessions. Okay, all you guys, I really appreciate today. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Dojun.
Okay,
Thank you.
bye
Great
bye.
meeting you.
감사합니다.
Okay.
Bye.
안녕히 가세요.
네, 안녕히 계세요.
Okay.
Bye bye.